The thunder of World War II echoed across continents and oceans, a brutal symphony of steel and fire. Yet, far from the visible battlefields, in the desolate, frozen reaches of the Arctic, a different, unseen war was constantly being waged, a clandestine struggle for the ultimate strategic advantage: accurate weather forecasts. For both Allied and Axis powers, predicting the capricious moods of the sky was not merely a matter of convenience. It was an existential imperative, directly influencing the fate of armies, fleets, and entire campaigns. Hitler's mighty Wehrmacht, his U-boat fleets, and the formidable Luftwaffe, all required precise meteorological information. A U-boat commander needed to know the sea state for optimal hunting or evasion. The Luftwaffe needed clear skies for bombing raids or air superiority. Crucial Soviet offensives on the Eastern Front could be launched or crippled by sudden thaws or blizzards. But for Germany, securing reliable, long-range weather data presented a colossal and ultimately insurmountable problem. The prevailing weather systems across Europe generally move from west to east. This meant that the most crucial long-range forecasts for Europe originated from the North Atlantic, Greenland, and the Arctic, areas increasingly dominated by Allied air and sea power. Allied dominance of these critical western meteorological zones made conventional weather gathering almost impossible for Germany. Their surface ships could not venture into the North Atlantic without immediate detection. Their reconnaissance aircraft faced overwhelming Allied air superiority. This created a gaping, strategic blind spot in German meteorology, forcing Hitler to gamble on fragmented data and increasingly desperate measures. This video will uncover the incredible, often forgotten, story of Hitler's Arctic gamble, a brutal, scientific struggle fought by isolated, tenacious crews in some of the most extreme environments on Earth. It's the tale of audacious German attempts to establish secret weather stations in the barren wildernesses of Greenland, Svalbard, Jan Mayen, and other remote Arctic islands. These clandestine outposts, often manned by tiny, isolated teams or even deployed by U-boats, were Germany's desperate bid to pierce the Allied weather curtain, to gain the precious meteorological data that could influence the fate of his entire war machine. But against these desperate efforts stood the relentless counterintelligence of the Allies. Daring commando raids, vigilant naval patrols, covert intelligence operations, and even a secret weather war, fought by their own meteorologists, systematically hunted down and neutralized these German outposts. The stakes were immense. The success of D-Day, the survival of the vital Arctic convoys to Russia, the timing of the Battle of the Bulge, and countless U-boat operations, all hinged on deciphering not just enemy codes, but the very secrets of the sky itself. This was a war of blizzards and ice, of long-range reconnaissance and close-quarters combat, of scientific instruments and human endurance against unimaginable isolation. It was a silent, scientific front that directly influenced the strategic outcome of World War II, proving that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with overwhelming force, but with charts, instruments, and the desperate, often deadly, quest to predict the next turn of the wind. In World War II, weather was not merely a backdrop to the conflict. It was an active, unpredictable, and often decisive force, capable of dictating the success or failure of the most ambitious military operations. For commanders on both sides, understanding and predicting meteorological conditions was a strategic imperative, a constant, agonizing quest to read the hand of fate that often held more sway than any general's plan. The immense strategic power of weather lay in its direct impact on virtually every aspect of modern warfare. Air operations. For the Luftwaffe's blitzkrieg ground support, or Allied strategic bombing raids, clear skies and calm winds were crucial for navigation, target acquisition, and bombing accuracy. Adverse weather could ground entire air forces, offer cover to enemy movements, or turn a precision strike into a costly, futile exercise. Naval warfare. The North Atlantic and Arctic seas, in particular, were notorious for their brutal and rapidly changing weather. 4 U-boat wolfpacks, calm seas facilitated torpedo attacks, while heavy storms could offer cover for evasive maneuvers or scatter convoys. 4 surface fleets, high waves and low visibility could render gunnery inaccurate and make detection difficult. 4 Arctic convoys, blizzards and ice could provide cover from air attacks, but also posed immense navigational and survival threats. Land operations. On land, weather was equally critical. Muddy conditions, the infamous Rasputitsa on the Eastern Front, could bog down armored divisions, turning lightning advances into grinding stalemates. Snow and extreme cold could disable equipment and inflict severe casualties through frostbite. Clear, dry weather was essential for rapid movement and effective air support. Amphibious landings. Perhaps most famously, major amphibious invasions like D-Day were utterly dependent on specific, narrow windows of favorable weather for safe crossings, manageable surf, and vital air cover. A storm could spell catastrophe. The fundamental challenge in forecasting for Europe stemmed from global weather patterns. Most of the weather systems affecting Europe originate in the vast, open expanses of the North Atlantic and the Arctic. These systems generally track from west to east. This meant that any nation wishing to accurately predict weather for Europe needed reliable meteorological data from these western regions. For the Allies, this presented a natural advantage. With Britain as a base and increasing control over the North Atlantic, they could operate weather reconnaissance flights, deploy weather ships, and establish meteorological stations in Iceland, Greenland, and other Atlantic islands. These assets provided a continuous stream of up-to-date data, forming a comprehensive picture of approaching weather systems. This intelligence was critical for planning operations like D-Day, where specific weather conditions were a non-negotiable requirement for success. For Germany, however, this geographical reality became a critical strategic vulnerability. Allied air and naval supremacy in the North Atlantic and Arctic made it nearly impossible for them to gather consistent, reliable meteorological data from these vital Western weather factories. Their surface ships could not break through Allied blockades. Their long-range reconnaissance aircraft, like the Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, faced increasing dangers from Allied fighters and radar. This created a gaping hole in German meteorological intelligence, particularly for medium and long-range forecasts that were essential for strategic planning. Hitler and his high command were acutely aware of this deficit. Without a clear picture of incoming weather, their U-boat operations, Luftwaffe deployments, and even their grand strategic offensives were effectively operating in the dark. This blind spot was a persistent source of anxiety and frustration, forcing them to rely on less complete data, older methods, and often desperate gambles. The very unpredictability of weather, which could be an equalizer or a destroyer, was thus weaponized. The Allies sought to master it through science and observation, while Germany, denied access to its sources, was forced into a clandestine and ultimately losing battle for the secrets of the sky. Faced with a gaping strategic blind spot in their weather forecasting, the German High Command, driven by Hitler's obsession with secrecy and control, embarked on a desperate and audacious gamble to establish clandestine weather stations in the remote, desolate reaches of the Arctic. These isolated outposts, often manned by tiny, resilient crews or even deployed as automated systems, were Germany's desperate bid to pierce the Allied weather curtain and gain the precious meteorological data that could influence the fate of their entire war machine. The Arctic offered two critical advantages for German meteorologists. Weather formation. Many of the critical weather systems that eventually swept across Europe formed or gathered strength in the Greenland, Iceland, Svalbard region. Data from these areas was invaluable for accurate medium and long-range forecasts. Secrecy. The sheer remoteness, harsh climate, and vastness of the Arctic offered pockets where a small, camouflaged station might operate undetected for weeks or months, far from Allied air and naval patrols. Germany's efforts to establish these secret weather stations took various forms. Manned stations. Wettertrupps. These were the most complex and resource-intensive. Tiny crews, typically 3 to 10 men, would be landed by U-boat or, less frequently, by modified long-range aircraft, in remote locations like Greenland, Svalbard, Spitsbergen, Franz Josef Land, and even the Canadian Arctic, though the latter was after the war ended in Europe. These crews would establish a fully functioning weather station, complete with radio equipment, instruments, and provisions for months, or even a year, of isolation. Their lives were a grim testament to human endurance, battling extreme cold, blizzards, polar bears, and the constant psychological toll of isolation. Their daily routine involved sending coded weather reports back to Germany, a vital, if sporadic, lifeline of meteorological data. Automatic weather stations, WFL, Wetterfunktur at Land, recognizing the dangers and logistical difficulties of manned stations, German ingenuity led to the development of highly advanced automatic weather stations. These were sophisticated, battery-powered devices, roughly the size of a small torpedo, that could be deployed by U-boat. Once on shore, they would automatically erect a mast, transmit weather data, temperature, humidity, wind speed/direction, barometric pressure, at preset intervals, and operate autonomously for months. These robot meteorologists were incredibly difficult to detect or destroy, as they required no human presence. One such station, Kurt, was deployed in Greenland by U-537 in 1943. Weather ships, Wetterbeobachtungsschiff, WBS Germany also attempted to operate weather ships in the North Atlantic and Arctic. These were often converted trawlers or cargo vessels, heavily camouflaged and armed, whose primary mission was to gather and transmit meteorological data. However, Allied air and naval superiority in these waters made their operations extremely dangerous, and many were hunted down and sunk, forcing Germany to rely more heavily on clandestine shore stations. The logistics of supplying and relieving these Arctic stations were almost as dangerous as their operation. U-boats, already stretched by the Battle of the Atlantic, were pressed into service for resupply missions, making perilous journeys through icy, storm-tossed waters. These U-boats not only ferried personnel and supplies but were sometimes involved in deploying the automatic stations. Hitler's personal interest in these Arctic operations was intense. He understood the strategic value of denying the Allies weather surprise and gaining it for his own forces. The data from even a single successful Arctic station could provide an invaluable few days' warning of a major weather front moving towards Europe, potentially influencing critical U-boat deployments, air raids, or ground offensives. However, despite these audacious and desperate efforts, Germany's Arctic weather network was never truly comprehensive or consistently effective. Its operation was sporadic, its stations constantly under threat, and its overall contribution limited by Allied counter-efforts. This Arctic gamble was a testament to German determination, but ultimately, it would prove to be a losing hand in the larger, unseen front of the weather war. The stage was set for a relentless Allied hunt to shut down these critical, clandestine sources of Axis meteorological intelligence. Against Hitler's desperate gamble to establish a clandestine weather network in the Arctic, the Allies launched a relentless and comprehensive counteroffensive. They understood that denying Germany vital meteorological data from the West was as strategically important as sinking U-boats or shooting down bombers. This was a brutal weather war, fought across vast, desolate expanses, involving daring commando raids, vigilant naval patrols, and meticulous intelligence gathering. The Allied objective was clear: hunt down and neutralize every single German weather station, manned or automated, that dared to penetrate their meteorological shield. The Allied counteroffensive relied on a multi-pronged approach, integrating intelligence, naval power, and specialized forces. Intelligence gathering, SIGINT Allied Signals Intelligence, SIGINT, played a crucial role. Long-range listening posts monitored the Arctic frequencies, attempting to triangulate the weak, burst transmissions from German weather stations. Even though the German weather reports were often encoded with their own complex ciphers, the act of transmission itself could be detected and localized, providing clues to the station's whereabouts. This constant electronic eavesdropping was the first line of defense. Naval patrols and interception, Allied naval vessels, particularly Royal Navy destroyers, corvettes, and later, U.S. Coast Guard cutters, maintained a vigilant watch over key Arctic sea lanes. Their mission was twofold: to intercept German weather ships, which were often disguised but eventually hunted down, and, crucially, to detect and engage any U-boats attempting to supply or deploy shore stations. Many of these naval engagements in the icy, storm-tossed waters were brutal and decisive, forcing German U-boats to operate under extreme risk. Aerial reconnaissance, long-range Allied reconnaissance aircraft, operating from Iceland, Greenland, and later, newly established airfields, systematically patrolled vast stretches of the Arctic coastline. Their mission was to spot any unusual activity, a hut, an antenna, a suspicious track in the snow, that might indicate a clandestine weather station. This was painstaking work in often atrocious flying conditions. Special operations and commando raids, this was the most dramatic and dangerous aspect of the Allied counteroffensive. Small, highly trained commando teams, often British Special Boat Service, SBS, or Canadian/US Special Forces, were deployed on daring raids against confirmed or suspected German weather stations. The raids, these operations were incredibly hazardous. Commandos would be landed from submarines, naval vessels, or even by air, parachute or glider, in remote, hostile territory. They faced immediate dangers from German patrols, treacherous terrain, and the brutally unforgiving Arctic environment. Their missions involved close-quarters combat to overwhelm the isolated German garrisons, destroy their equipment, and capture any valuable codebooks or meteorological instruments. Example: Operation Gauntlet, 1941, and Operation Zitronella, 1943. These and other raids on Svalbard, Spitsbergen, and Jan Mayen aimed to disrupt German weather operations, destroy coal mines that could be used as cover, and deny Germany any foothold in the region. The capture of German weather ships and the raids on shore stations yielded invaluable intelligence, including Enigma machines, some of the earliest captures, and meteorological codebooks. These captures were critical for Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park, providing invaluable cribs and insights that aided the breaking of German naval enigma, including the four-rotor Shark. The weather war in the Arctic was a brutal, relentless, and often lonely struggle. For the isolated German crews, the Allied hunt was a constant, nerve-wracking threat, knowing that at any moment, a patrol might appear from the sea or sky. For the Allied commandos and naval forces, it was a test of endurance and courage against both the enemy and the harshest natural environment on Earth. By systematically dismantling Germany's Arctic weather network, the Allies not only denied Hitler vital meteorological intelligence but also secured their own decisive advantage in predicting the very secrets of the sky, information that would prove critical for every major operation to come. The relentless efforts of the Allies to secure and protect their meteorological advantage, while systematically denying Germany reliable long-range forecasts, paid off in two of the most decisive European campaigns of World War II, the D-Day landings and the Battle of the Bulge. In both instances, Allied weather superiority proved to be a critical, often unseen, factor that directly influenced strategic decisions, saved countless lives, and profoundly shaped the outcome of the war. D-Day, Operation Overlord, June 1944. The planning for D-Day was utterly dependent on specific, narrow windows of favorable weather. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, faced an agonizing decision that hinged entirely on meteorological predictions. The requirements were stringent. Low tide at dawn, essential for exposing beach obstacles. Full moon, needed for paratroopers' navigation and illumination during night drops, though clouds complicated this. Calm seas, crucial for the safe crossing of thousands of landing craft and the successful deployment of amphibious vehicles. Low to moderate winds, to avoid rough seas and aid airborne drops. Clear skies, vital for air superiority, bombing support, and reconnaissance. Allied meteorologists, working around the clock, famously faced a dilemma. Early June presented a period of notoriously unstable weather. Initial predictions for June 5 were dire, with high winds and rough seas. Eisenhower was forced to make the agonizing decision to postpone the invasion by 24 hours. His chief meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg of the RAF, then delivered a tentative forecast for a brief, unexpected window of improved weather on June 6. It wasn't perfect, but it was just good enough. Eisenhower, trusting his meteorologists, who had superior access to North Atlantic data thanks to the weather war efforts, made the fateful go decision for June 6. This crucial, data-driven choice gave the Allies a critical element of surprise. German meteorologists, lacking reliable long-range data from the West, predicted continued bad weather for June 6, leading them to believe no invasion was imminent. Many German commanders, including Field Marshal Rommel, were away from their headquarters, confident that the storm would keep the Allies at bay. This German meteorological blind spot was a direct consequence of the successful Allied weather war in the Arctic and North Atlantic, and it allowed the D-Day landings to achieve their initial vital surprise, potentially saving thousands of Allied lives. Battle of the Bulge, December 1944. Months later, as the Allies pushed towards Germany, Hitler launched his desperate, last-gasp offensive through the Ardennes in mid-December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. This surprise attack relied heavily on poor weather conditions to succeed. Hitler's plan was to leverage thick fog, low clouds, and snow to neutralize Allied air superiority, preventing reconnaissance and bombing, and allowing his armored columns to punch through undetected. Initially, Hitler's gamble paid off. The weather was indeed abysmal, grounding Allied air forces for days and enabling the German surprise. However, Allied meteorologists, again benefiting from a more comprehensive data network, were able to predict a crucial break in the weather that would occur just after Christmas. This forecast, often with more certainty than their German counterparts could achieve, allowed Allied air forces to prepare. When the skies cleared on December 23, hundreds of Allied fighter bombers immediately took to the air, devastating German tanks and supply columns that had become stalled on the roads. This renewed air power was instrumental in blunting the German offensive and allowing the Allies to regain the initiative. For Hitler, the clearing skies were a bitter blow, directly undermining his strategy. His generals, relying on less complete weather intelligence, were caught off guard by the sudden return of Allied air power. In both D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, the ability to predict, adapt to, and exploit weather conditions, while denying the enemy similar foresight, was a direct, unseen consequence of the weather war in the Arctic. It transformed the unpredictable hand of fate into a powerful strategic advantage, proving that control over the skies, both literally and meteorologically, was crucial for victory in World War II. Behind the grand strategic chessboard of weather forecasting lay a grim reality: the human cost of gathering data in the world's most unforgiving environments. For the isolated German crews manning their clandestine Arctic weather stations, the Wettertrupps, life was a brutal test of solitude, resilience, and sheer survival against both the elements and the relentless Allied hunt. Their story is one of profound isolation and extraordinary endurance, often overlooked in the broader narrative of World War II. These tiny crews, typically comprising just 3 to 10 men, were deployed by U-boat or modified aircraft to desolate, icebound locations in Greenland, Svalbard, Jan Mayen, and other remote Arctic islands. Their mission was simple: operate the weather instruments, record data, and transmit coded meteorological reports back to Germany at preset intervals. Their existence was a testament to extreme self-reliance, cut off from the rest of the war, often for months, or even a full year. Life in these Arctic outposts was an unceasing battle against the elements. Extreme cold, temperatures plummeted far below freezing, often accompanied by savage blizzards. Frostbite was a constant threat, and every outdoor task, from repairing equipment to gathering supplies, became a struggle for survival. Perpetual darkness and isolation. During the long Arctic winter, many stations experienced months of perpetual darkness, amplifying feelings of loneliness and disorientation. The isolation from the outside world was profound, with only intermittent radio contact providing a tenuous link to home and the war. Wildlife threats. Polar bears, formidable and ever-present predators, posed a constant danger, often necessitating armed watches and robust fortifications around their small huts. Logistical fragility. Their very survival depended on the successful delivery of provisions and fuel by U-boat, missions that were themselves incredibly risky and often delayed by weather or Allied patrols. A failed resupply could mean starvation or freezing to death. The psychological toll of this existence was immense. Cabin fever, boredom, and the ever-present threat of Allied discovery combined with the crushing isolation to test the limits of sanity. Despite the camaraderie within the small teams, the sheer monotony of the daily routine, observing instruments, coding messages, maintaining equipment, in an unchanging, hostile landscape, weighed heavily. Yet, they persevered, driven by a deep sense of duty and the knowledge that their data, however small, was vital to the Führer's war effort. Many of these men were not seasoned soldiers, but meteorologists, radio operators, and technicians, thrust into a survival mission far beyond their original training. They constructed ingenious, often camouflaged, huts and bunkers, sometimes digging into snowdrifts or rock faces to create shelter. They learned to hunt, to navigate the treacherous ice, and to adapt to an environment that actively sought to kill them. The constant threat of Allied discovery added a layer of acute anxiety. They knew the Allies were actively hunting them, and the appearance of a reconnaissance aircraft or the distant sound of a naval vessel could send them scrambling for cover, prepared to destroy their equipment rather than let it fall into enemy hands. Many stations were indeed discovered and attacked, leading to desperate skirmishes, captures, or the obliteration of the outpost. These were the silent sufferers of the weather war, fighting a lonely battle for atmospheric data in the world's most remote outposts. Their extreme isolation, their battles with nature, and their unwavering, if ultimately futile, dedication to their mission paint a powerful picture of human endurance. Their stories, often only pieced together decades later from declassified records and survivors' accounts, stand as a grim testament to the hidden fronts of World War II and the profound human cost exacted even in the quietest, coldest corners of the conflict. Recognizing the immense human cost, logistical fragility, and inherent risks associated with manned Arctic weather stations, German ingenuity turned to technology. In a lesser-known but scientifically remarkable effort, German engineers developed highly sophisticated automatic weather stations, WFL, Wetterfunkgerät Land. These robot meteorologists were designed to operate autonomously for months, providing vital meteorological data without putting human lives at risk, making them incredibly difficult for the Allies to detect or destroy. The WFL stations were technological marvels for their time. They were compact, designed to be robust enough to survive deployment in the harsh Arctic environment, and capable of functioning without human intervention. Design and components. Each station consisted of a series of cylindrical containers, typically about 3 feet long and 18 inches in diameter. Inside, they housed a complex array of instruments: a barometer to measure atmospheric pressure, a thermometer for temperature, a hygrometer for humidity, and an anemometer for wind speed and direction. These instruments were connected to a sophisticated timing mechanism and a radio transmitter. Power source. The stations were powered by a bank of nickel-cadmium batteries, designed to last for up to 6 months, providing the necessary energy for data collection and transmission. Deployment. The WFL stations were primarily deployed by U-boats. A U-boat would surface near a remote Arctic coastline, and a small team would quickly offload the station components. The station would then be assembled on shore, including the erection of a telescoping mast, usually around 30 feet tall, from which the sensors would operate. The entire deployment process had to be swift and covert to avoid detection. Autonomous operation. Once deployed and activated, the WFL would automatically collect weather data at preset intervals, e.g., every 3 hours. This data would then be converted into a coded radio signal and transmitted in short bursts back to Germany. After transmission, the station would go silent until the next scheduled report, further minimizing its chances of detection. One of the most famous and later, only fully recovered examples of these stations was Kurt, deployed by U-537 in October 1943, on the desolate coast of Labrador, Canada. The crew of U-537 not only deployed the station but even left behind cigarette packets and other litter designed to look like evidence of Allied meteorological activity, a subtle deception to further mask its origin. The Kurt station operated for months, silently transmitting its data across the Atlantic. The existence and deployment of these automatic stations presented a unique and profound challenge for Allied counterintelligence. Unlike manned stations, there were no human radio operators to interrogate, no logs to capture, and no physical presence to spot or raid. The brief, intermittent radio transmissions were incredibly difficult to pinpoint, even with advanced direction-finding equipment. Once deployed, the WFL stations largely blended into the barren, rocky landscape, making aerial reconnaissance extremely difficult. They were truly ghosts in the Arctic weather war. For the Germans, these automatic stations offered a theoretically perfect solution to their meteorological blind spot: reliable, consistent data from critical western regions, gathered autonomously and with minimal risk of human capture or exposure. They represented a significant scientific achievement in wartime remote sensing. However, despite their ingenuity and occasional successes, the sheer vastness of the Arctic, combined with persistent Allied efforts to detect any anomalous radio signals and conduct sweeps, meant that Germany could never establish a sufficiently dense and enduring network to truly overcome their fundamental weather intelligence deficit. The robot meteorologists were clever, but not numerous enough to win the war for the secrets of the sky. Against Hitler's desperate gamble to establish a clandestine weather network in the Arctic, the Allies launched a relentless and comprehensive counteroffensive. They understood that denying Germany vital meteorological data from the West was as strategically important as sinking U-boats or shooting down bombers. This was a brutal weather war, fought across vast, desolate expanses, involving daring commando raids, vigilant naval patrols, and meticulous intelligence gathering. The Allied objective was clear: hunt down and neutralize every single German weather station, manned or automated, that dared to penetrate their meteorological shield. The Allied counteroffensive relied on a multi-pronged approach, integrating intelligence, naval power, and specialized forces. Intelligence gathering, SIGINT Allied Signals Intelligence, SIGINT, played a crucial role. Long-range listening posts, known as WWII stations, tirelessly monitored the Arctic frequencies, attempting to triangulate the weak, burst transmissions from German weather stations. Even though the German weather reports were often encoded with their own complex ciphers, which Bletchley Park and other decryption centers worked to break, the act of transmission itself could be detected and localized, providing crucial clues to the station's whereabouts. This constant electronic eavesdropping was the first line of defense, a silent net cast across the vast emptiness. Naval patrols and interception. Allied naval vessels, particularly Royal Navy destroyers, corvettes, and later, U.S. Coast Guard cutters, maintained a vigilant watch over key Arctic sea lanes. Their mission was twofold: to intercept German weather ships, which were often disguised merchant vessels but eventually hunted down and sunk or captured, and, crucially, to detect and engage any U-boats attempting to supply or deploy shore stations. Many of these naval engagements in the icy, storm-tossed waters were brutal and decisive, forcing German U-boats to operate under extreme risk, diverting precious submarine assets from the Battle of the Atlantic. The capture of weather ships often yielded invaluable meteorological codebooks and even Enigma machines, providing critical cribs for codebreakers. Aerial reconnaissance. Long-range Allied reconnaissance aircraft, operating from Iceland, Greenland, and later, newly established airfields in the Canadian Arctic, systematically patrolled vast stretches of the remote coastlines and ice fields. Their mission was painstaking and dangerous: to spot any unusual activity, a hut, an antenna mast, a suspicious track in the snow, or even the subtle glint of a deployed automatic station that might indicate a clandestine German presence. This was treacherous flying in often atrocious weather conditions, battling blizzards, limited visibility, and extreme cold. Special operations and commando raids. This was the most dramatic and dangerous aspect of the Allied counteroffensive. Small, highly trained commando teams, often British Special Boat Service, SBS, Canadian Forces, or U.S. Special Forces like the Greenland Patrol, were deployed on daring raids against confirmed or suspected German weather stations. The raids. These operations were incredibly hazardous. Commandos would be landed from submarines, naval vessels, or even by air, parachute or ski plane, in remote, hostile territory. They faced immediate dangers from German patrols, treacherous terrain, and the brutally unforgiving Arctic environment. Their missions involved close-quarters combat to overwhelm the isolated German garrisons, destroy their equipment, and capture any valuable codebooks, meteorological instruments, or, in some cases, Enigma machines. Examples: operations like Operation Gauntlet, 1941, and Operation Zitronella, 1943, on Svalbard, Spitsbergen, and numerous patrols and engagements in Greenland, aimed not just to destroy stations but also to deny Germany any foothold in the region that could serve a broader strategic purpose. The captured German weather codebooks and, critically, actual Enigma machines found on weather ships or stations, provided invaluable cribs and intelligence for Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park. These captures were crucial for aiding the breaking of German naval Enigma, including the complex four-rotor Shark cipher, which directly impacted the Battle of the Atlantic. The weather war in the Arctic was a brutal, relentless, and often lonely struggle. For the isolated German crews, the Allied hunt was a constant, nerve-wracking threat, knowing that at any moment, a patrol might appear from the sea or sky. For the Allied commandos and naval forces, it was a test of endurance and courage against both the enemy and the harshest natural environment on Earth. By systematically dismantling Germany's Arctic weather network, the Allies not only denied Hitler vital meteorological intelligence but also secured their own decisive advantage in predicting the very secrets of the sky, information that would prove critical for every major operation to come, from the North Atlantic convoys to the liberation of Europe. While relentlessly hunting down Germany's Arctic outposts, the Allies simultaneously embarked on building their own comprehensive and robust meteorological network across the North Atlantic and Arctic. This was not a clandestine effort. but a systematic and overt construction of a scientific infrastructure designed to provide their commanders with an unparalleled understanding of global weather patterns. This broad, interconnected system of data gathering solidified their weather superiority, turning the unpredictable sky into a powerful, predictable ally. The foundation of Allied weather mastery lay in their strategic control over the crucial weather factories of the North Atlantic, areas where major weather systems impacting Europe originated. Key components of this network included weather ships, ocean weather stations. Allied navies, particularly the Royal Navy and U.S. Coast Guard, deployed dedicated weather ships. These vessels, often purpose-built or converted, were stationed at fixed points in the North Atlantic, continuously gathering and transmitting vital meteorological data: temperature, pressure, humidity, wind, sea state. These floating weather stations provided an uninterrupted stream of real-time data, feeding directly into Allied forecasting centers. Their operation was dangerous, as they were often isolated and vulnerable to U-boat attacks, but their contribution was indispensable. Land-based stations in strategic locations. The Allies established and heavily fortified meteorological stations in strategically vital landmasses. Iceland, a crucial stepping stone in the North Atlantic, Iceland hosted numerous weather stations that provided invaluable data on incoming systems. Greenland, the vast ice-covered island of Greenland, was another critical location, where Allied, often U.S. Coast Guard or Army Air Forces, stations gathered data, sometimes in direct conflict with lingering German efforts. Faroe Islands and Newfoundland. These islands also provided essential observation points, extending the Allied reach across the Atlantic. Weather reconnaissance flights. Allied long-range aircraft, including modified bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, regularly conducted hazardous weather reconnaissance flights deep into the North Atlantic and Arctic. These hurricane hunter flights would deliberately fly into and around severe weather systems, gathering crucial atmospheric data directly from the source. The pilots and meteorologists on board risked their lives to collect this information, providing forecasters with real-time, in-situ observations that were impossible to obtain otherwise. International cooperation. The Allied weather network benefited immensely from robust international cooperation. Data was shared between the British Meteorological Office, the U.S. Weather Bureau, the U.S. Army Air Forces Weather Service, and their Canadian and other Commonwealth counterparts. This collaborative approach ensured a comprehensive flow of data and the sharing of best practices in forecasting. The sheer volume and geographical coverage of this Allied network meant that their meteorologists had a consistently far more complete and accurate picture of impending weather systems than their Axis counterparts. They could track storms developing in the North Atlantic days before they reached Europe, predict periods of fog or clear skies with greater confidence, and provide commanders with detailed, long-range forecasts. This weather superiority allowed for a level of strategic planning and operational flexibility that Germany simply could not match. Decisions about convoy sailings, air raid timings, and, most famously, the precise date for D-Day, were made with an unprecedented degree of meteorological confidence. While the weather remained an unpredictable force of nature, the Allies had, through science, technology, and meticulous organization, gained a critical edge in understanding and anticipating its movements. This mastery over the unseen front of the sky became a silent, yet decisive weapon in the Allied arsenal, directly influencing the timing and success of major operations and ensuring that their forces fought not only with courage and ingenuity, but with the full, informed backing of the elements. By the final years of World War II, the silent, relentless struggle for meteorological dominance had been decisively won by the Allies. The systematic efforts to establish a comprehensive weather network, while simultaneously dismantling Hitler's desperate Arctic outposts, had transformed the unpredictable skies into a powerful, predictable ally. This ultimate forecast, born from scientific mastery and unwavering vigilance, proved to be a decisive, yet often unseen, factor in securing Allied victory. The impact of this weather superiority on the course of the war was profound and multifaceted. Strategic advantage in key campaigns. As explored, Allied weather forecasts were instrumental in the success of D-Day, enabling the critical element of surprise, and in blunting the Battle of the Bulge by predicting the clearing skies that allowed Allied air power to strike. These were not minor influences. They were game-changing decisions that hinged directly on superior meteorological intelligence. Protection of supply lines. Accurate forecasts were vital for the survival of the critical Arctic convoys to Russia, allowing them to navigate treacherous weather systems, use storms for cover against U-boats and aircraft, or avoid impassable ice. Similarly, North Atlantic convoys benefited from foreknowledge of impending gales or clear periods for U-boat hunting. Optimizing offensive operations. Allied air forces could plan strategic bombing raids with greater confidence, knowing when clear weather windows would allow for optimal target acquisition and less risk from storms. Naval operations, from fleet movements to amphibious landings, were timed to exploit favorable sea states. Compounding German weakness. For Hitler and his generals, the consistent lack of reliable long-range weather data from the West was a persistent source of strategic anxiety and frustration. It forced them to operate with incomplete information, often leading to poor tactical decisions or missed opportunities. Their desperate attempts to establish Arctic weather stations were largely thwarted, leaving them guessing about crucial weather developments, while the Allies made informed choices. This meteorological blind spot was a silent, yet corrosive, factor in their ultimate defeat. The unseen heroes of the sky. The victory in the weather war was a triumph of the unsung heroes. The meteorologists who crunched data in stifling forecast rooms, the pilots who risked their lives on reconnaissance flights into the heart of storms, the naval crews who manned isolated weather ships, and the commandos who fought in the frozen wilderness. Their contributions, often far from the glory of the front lines, were indispensable to the Allied war effort. The legacy of the weather war extends beyond the conflict itself. It cemented the importance of meteorology as a critical component of national security and strategic planning, influencing military operations and disaster preparedness for decades to come. It also underscored the power of scientific collaboration and the dedication of countless individuals to collect, analyze, and interpret complex data for the greater good. Hitler's Arctic gamble was a testament to his desperation, but ultimately, it was a losing hand. The Allies, through superior organization, technological prowess, and a relentless commitment to mastering the secrets of the sky, gained an unseen, decisive advantage. The battle for the weather, fought in the frozen expanses of the Arctic and the churning waters of the North Atlantic, proved that understanding the elements was not just about predicting the next storm. It was about controlling the tempo of war, saving thousands of lives, and ensuring that the final push for victory could be launched under a sky of Allied choosing, ultimately sealing the fate of the Third Reich.